Welcome to the OnScript podcast, your home for world-class conversations on scripture and theology, where you get to meet some of the best in the field. Visit us at onscript.study. Say hello on Twitter at OnScript Podcast and stop by our Facebook page at facebook.com/OnScript.
Hey everybody, welcome back to OnScript. This is Matt Lynch coming to you from Regent College in Vancouver. I'm not going to give a long intro, but I do want to say a special thank you to Ed Hatkey, who is nearing the end of his time with OnScript after having produced who knows how many episodes. I think it's over 200. So Ed, we're going to miss you. You're not gone yet, but it will be at the end of the summer. We've got a new team coming on to replace Ed. It takes a team to do that, and we're grateful for those who are going to be involved in that. But I just want to express that appreciation here. So without further ado, enjoy this episode.
Welcome, OnScript listeners. I am here with the Revd Dr Mark Scarlata, who is a tutor and a lecturer in Old Testament studies at St Mellitus College in London. And Mark is also a Vicar-Chaplain at St Edward King and Martyr, Cambridge, where he serves as the priest as one of the oldest churches in Cambridge. That was also integral to the English Reformation. Mark is married to Bettina, and they have 3 kids. Let me list off all your books here, Mark, before we get going, because you are quite prolific, and we're going to have to talk at some point how you're doing this as both a lecturer and a full-time priest. But you have Outside of Eden, Cain in the Ancient Versions of Genesis 4, 1 through 16 with T.N.T. Clark. Am I My Brother's Keeper? Christian Citizenship in a Globalized Society with Cascade. The Abiding Presence, a theological commentary on Exodus with SCM Press. A Journey Through the World of Leviticus, Holiness, Sacrifice, and the Rock Badger with Cascade, which is what we're going to talk about today. And also forthcoming, you have the Theology of the Book of Leviticus within the Old Testament Theology series with Cambridge University Press, which will also fold into the discussion today as well. With this, I also looked on Amazon and found out you have even more books out there floating around that I'm not going to list, but there are even more. And you're doing all of this while you're a priest. Well, first of all, welcome, Mark, to OnScript.
Thank you. It's great to be with you. And
you're a second-time act on OnScript as well. So we've talked about the Exodus book. So you have a little Genesis, a little Exodus. We're talking about Leviticus now. Is the next book Numbers? Are you just working your way through the Bible? Or?
That's what my students keep asking me, and I'm not really sure. I mean, Exodus and Leviticus just kind of connected together. I think they naturally connect. Numbers, it's funny. I haven't had. I mean, there's so many great stories in Numbers, but no big desire to dive into that. I had thought about Deuteronomy at some point, but I'm actually working on something completely different at the moment, which you know. Because you helped me kind of form my thoughts on this, but which is a biblical theology of wine. So I've kind of gone out of the Pentateuch and into, across really the whole Bible to look at the material and metaphor and the use of wine in the Bible. So that's been good fun. So something a little bit different.
Somehow worked into your profession a reason that you have to drink all kinds of wine now, right?
That's right. I was looking at the books on my...
sorry, honey, it's just business. I need to really finish this bottle tonight.
Exactly. If you walked into our home, you would easily think I was an alcoholic because there is a couple of books that I had just laying around, and one was called The Wine Bible. It's just all about wine around the world. And then there was another one sitting on top of it by a chap called Roger Scrunton called I Drink, Therefore I Am. If you came into my house and you saw the wine bottles lying around, and you would think it wasn't a biblical theology of wine, but I promise it is.
Just research. Just research.
Just the best kind of research ever.
So let's begin with, how did you, I always think biblical studies is such a weird profession. So how did a normal person like you end up in biblical studies? And we'll get to the priesthood later, but I'm interested specifically in how you ended up in biblical studies.
Yeah, biblical studies. I did my MDiv at a place called Gordon Conwell, just around Boston, and had to do. We were forced in our MDiv to do a couple of semesters of Hebrew and then exegesis, a couple of semesters of Greek. And I just found that I loved Hebrew. I loved everything about it. When I went off to become an associate pastor in Connecticut for about 7 years in the Congregational Church after seminary. And I found myself just wanting to keep kind of delving into the language. So then ended up going back up to Yale for an MA because it was the kind of closest place to us. And I don't know. It was something about it. I mean, in particular, the Old Testament. And I think, you probably like me and many others listening to the podcast, if you've grown up in a semi-Christian home or around the church, you are kind of fed on the New Testament, but you usually know very, very little about the Old Testament. And so I think the more that I delved into it, just the more fascinated I was with how critical it was to interpreting Scripture in general, but just in terms of in terms of faith, in terms of life, all of these types of things. So then, I just kind of caught the bug, I suppose. And after kind of going back to Yale while I was still working as a pastor, it was then that I kind of realized that I really love this stuff, and the next step is kind of doing the PhD. That's kind of the final step, and I knew at that point, I think the market for PhDs right now is not for finding a job is not
light.
Great. Exactly, it's not great, and it wasn't. It wasn't. It was somewhat similar back then, but I think for me, having been involved in ministry, wanting to kind of pursue, and I remember having a conversation with one of my professors up at Yale, and they were talking about, because I said, well, what if I go and do the PhD, but don't become a professor because there are not many jobs out there, then what? And she responded and said, throughout the history of the church, the scholar priest has been a vocation that has been, a critical part of the church, the doctors of the church and that kind of thing. And it was funny because I think when she said that kind of clicked in my own head and in my own calling. And I just realized, I thought, oh, yeah, you can actually be, a diligent, kind of accomplished scholar in, say, biblical studies, and also continue to serve in the church and use both of those things as part of your vocation, part of your calling.
Yeah, maybe one day you'll get there.
Yeah, someday. Exactly. But I'm hoping. I was just reading. It was funny. I was just reading.
That was a joke. You're obviously accomplished.
I was reading something, a little blurb on Thomas Aquinas, and actually the goal of where I'm getting to is the point where I kind of reach the beatific vision, and then just stop writing everything, and then it just all ends, and then and then you can start enjoying life.
Yeah, the goal is to become like Thomas Aquinas. I got it. Yeah. So do you feel like working in the priesthood in Cambridge, your church is like right smack dab in the middle of it all there. Do you feel like that in any way shifts or sculpts your research or your writing agenda?
Yeah, I think it does, actually. I mean, I think, I wrestled a lot, and maybe some other scholars who are very committed to their faith and their life in the church. I think I suffered from the dilemma when I first graduated from Cambridge with my PhD of do I write for the academy? Do I pursue that kind of scholarship, or do I write for the church? Or and then kind of how is I going to find a balance of this? And I think what I've found is being at St Mellitus, which is a theological college or a seminary in London, I think I've tried to find my niche and my balance between kind of all the academic training that I've had, but also seeing that there's specific meaning behind the text. I loved an interview you did with someone recently, and it was with an African woman who was talking about the hermeneutic of power, the scriptural hermeneutic of power, and I thought that was such a fascinating. I just love when she said that, because
Liz Mburu.
Yeah,
I was just trying to think of her name. Liz Mburu. Yeah,
and it was such a wonderful way to put it, because it kind of framed what I feel like my particular scholarship is, in the sense of, it's not just, and there's nothing wrong with kind of scholarship for scholarship's sake, going into the ancient world and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I appreciate that as much as anyone, but there is something about the kind of commitment to the Christian faith and the Christian life in the church that shapes your writing in such a way that you feel like there's something more to be said than maybe just a point of curiosity, or, kind of putting up some theory as to why this was written or when it was written or whatever. And so, so I think the church does shape the way that I write, and it shapes the other thing that shapes the way that I write is that we've got one of the ministries of the church is a little group that we call the Scriptorium. And so we have a group of PhD students who are mostly kind of in the university doing different types of degrees, and we gather on a Tuesday and Wednesday with kind of basically like a liturgical format to the day. We have morning and evening prayer. We gather for lunch. We have discussions around these things. And what I've found in that group is an amazing kind of hive of Christian thinking on an absolute variety. I mean, we talk about any topic under the sun, whether it's social, political, economical, whatever it is. And I find that has really shaped how I think and how I understand things. And it's funny because I think that's also made me realize how deficient our scholarship is sometimes, maybe in comparison to, let's say, the rabbis who, if they gathered in a synagogue to study Torah, it was always study done in community. And there's something, I'm sure you've had the same experience, that when you study with people in community, your ideas are shaped and they go all different directions and in ways that you can't experience that you can't have as just a kind of isolated, off in your ivory tower scholar type thing.
Yeah. It's usually the best you get is like emails from friends that are like, hey, have you seen this book?
Yeah. yeah, exactly.
You're like, yeah, I just reviewed it.
Yeah. So
this book that you've done with Cascade, it's, my subtitle for it would be Leviticus has a PR problem. I mean, it really does. I've been at meetings recently with normal Christians who groaned at the idea of having to read Leviticus out loud.
Yeah.
Or, one I was at a place where a pastor said, to make an example, said, does anybody actually like the book of Leviticus? Raise your hand if you like it. And I think he was being rhetorical, but I was like,
I raised my hand.
I love it. It's my favorite book in the Bible.
I love it. Yeah.
So what got you down the road to Leviticus? And then what, if you talk about the felt need that you're answering here, what's the felt need that you think you're answering?
Yeah, I think I my experience has been the same. Actually, it was really funny. I've been teaching an MA class or series of lectures on Leviticus this term, and one of our students turned to me just this past week and said, when I saw that Leviticus was on our core modules, the core lessons that we had to take, he said, really, my heart just sunk. He thought I thought it was going to be the most dry, worst, boring class. He's like, this has turned out to be the best class I've taken at the college. And it was a wonderful kind of testimony to when you actually begin to start reading Leviticus, it's just, this whole new world opens up. But I think for me, one of the reasons why I got into it was because I had written that commentary on Exodus, this kind of theological commentary, and I realized that so much of what I was trying to argue in Exodus about this kind of main motif about God's divine presence coming down to dwell with his people, Exodus kind of finishes with this, God's glory coming down on the tabernacle after Moses has built it, and no one can enter. And it was kind of it was a bit of a cliffhanger, and I kind of finished Exodus thinking, well, wait a second, that can't be, where do we go from here? And then that's really where you get, Leviticus comes into its own. So that's what kind of originally got me started on it. And then it was just during the first lockdown we had, kind of 2019, we did a teaching series at our college, and we did it on Zoom, and we did a 4-part series on Leviticus. And so we had all these people who were bored to death sitting at home and probably never would have come to a Zoom class on Leviticus, but they did. And it was great because what came out of the 4 questions, or the 4 sessions, was just a list. So we just cut and paste the chat because we just asked people to put questions in the chat. And so literally I took all of those kind of 4 sessions of cut and paste the chat onto Word documents, looked at all these questions, and just started figuring out chapters in my head and thinking, okay, how do I explain this to just your average churchgoer? And it was really fun actually, because the book kind of itself just took took its own shape, and it was just really literally in response to people who were like, I don't get it. like, why do women seem to get like the short end of the stick always in Leviticus? That was a big one, actually. That came out pretty frequently.
Yeah, that comes out throughout the whole Torah, I think. So, which you got to put on the right goggles. And the book unfolds quite. I mean, even I was looking back through it again. I'd read it before, but it unfolds quite naturally. You're halfway through the book, going, "Oh wow, I've been reading a book on Leviticus." Like for me, it's exciting, but it works. You open the book though with talking about, kind of the loss of wonder, the loss of the idea of sacred space, or, the loss that we have necessarily sacred space. And also a lot of the peculiar problems that the Israelites face, like what was their actual world like? So why did you open with this kind of space and wonder and agrarianism? That's a unique mix, I guess, to get people hooked on Leviticus.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something actually that I've continued to come back to in my own research, and especially as I've been working on this book on wine. When you start getting into kind of some of the agricultural sides of wine, you begin to realize just kind of the depth and the power of the metaphor and the material, and just what wine meant to ancient Israel, and all the depth of that. But I think one of the things for me that in reading Leviticus, for the first few times that I went through it, I think what I realized was that I was missing something from my kind of worldview. As what is it about what I'm seeing, and the way that I'm seeing it, and why? The other thing I couldn't figure out, I was thinking, well, why are my students asking questions like why would God want to kill, want us to kill an animal? And it was this, they made sacrifice sound as if it was this, this barbaric, horrendous thing. And I kept in the back of my mind thinking, you don't see the slaughterhouse down the road that is, treating animals like nothing, like that they're not creatures, that they're just literally material objects to be killed, slaughtered, packaged up, and put on your groceries, on your grocery store counter or in the grocery store refrigerator. And yet somehow, killing a single animal, with a knife is somehow more barbaric in people's minds than what goes on in our world today. And so that kind of really got me thinking. I'm thinking, why? Like, what is going on with our world? And so I've delved into, as we do, all sorts of research and things like that. And I think, one of the things that's come out, and I've heard more and more people talking about it actually since I've been researching it, but is this kind of idea of the disenchantment or the desacralization of our world, that our world is one in which we treat the material world just simply as material. It's nothing more than stuff that we can use for economic gain, for our own pleasure, for our own consumption. Unfortunately, I think all of this has led us to our kind of ecological crises. But the idea in Leviticus, and what I tried to argue in the first chapter, is that to enter into this world of sacrifice and ritual, as that there's this, we have to enter into a kind of a sacred view of the world in which, where God is in everything, not kind of in the pantheistic way, but where God's power, his life, his breath, his sustaining of the whole cosmos is something that fills life. And, and in Leviticus in particular, there's also the concentrated portion of that glory and holiness in the tabernacle, but it also fills all things. And so in that, once you kind of try to take the leap, I think, out of our own kind of desacralized society where we have these kind of great chasms in our thought between, killing a single animal is somehow kind of barbaric, but killing, 8,000, cows a day in a slaughterhouse with, those, what are those things called? Those bolt guns. Yeah. Somehow that's, that's fine. That's ethically okay. So I think that's where we need to kind of step out of our world. And again, so much of that is our detachment and our detachment from the land, our detachment from things like food production, things, the way that we treat the land and the consequences that it has. So I think that whole idea of and some scholars, I was just reading, I've actually got it on my desk here, Warren Wiersbe's The Sacred Life, talk about this re-enchantment of the world. Like, how do we re-root ourselves in creation to understand how we fit into the economy of creation, but also how we engage with and interact within the whole economy of creation as kind of a participant, not as someone who is separate, just treating the world as material. And so I think that is one of the keys, at least for me it was, and why I put it at the beginning of the book, one of the keys to recognizing, okay, we have a very, very different, obviously, cultural view and worldview than these ancient authors did. And I think that's key. I mean, and I know, you've done tons of studies in Leviticus, and you've done all sorts of studies in ritual and things like that. Is this something that you see as kind of one of the hurdles that we need to get over in order to begin to really kind of grasp an interpretation of this, of this book?
Yeah, no, I was stuck in all my own thinking. It wasn't until I read your book that I was like, oh yeah, this is another layer that I've completely ignored.
but
no, I get tunnel vision.
I can switch that around, because I'll just say that but it wasn't until your book that I flipped around and saw that this ritual thing was so important.
Okay, well, that's good. I mean, it's almost like a community of scholars.
Iron sharpens iron. That's right. Exactly.
So yeah, no, it was very, very helpful to me. And I mean, even little things like, and you've mentioned this here and other places, that the meat consumption, we glibly eat meat, and yet this is part of, and wine as well, that this is all part of the caloric intake. Even the admonitions against drunkenness probably has as much to do with the famine breaching that it can bring as anything else. So like this idea that they're sitting around having, like Brazilian barbecue every weekend.
Yeah, really.
That might be disturbing, actually, but that's not what's going on. So because this is Leviticus and, because the Torah, really, we have to talk about the issue of holiness. Now, holiness and holy are one of my banned words when I do oral exams. I'm like, can't say this word unless you're willing to use it in a technical way. So what do you mean by holiness, and how do you bridge the gap between the kind of the blah Christianese version of holy and the Levitical sense of holy?
Yeah, gosh, it's a tough one. So you have kind of the standard, Hebrew definition of something that's being set apart, but certainly there is the idea of something is set apart. So only God is holy, and so only He can kind of make something holy, whether it's a holy object, something, tongs, or something you use in the tabernacle, whatever it is. But I think, as I kind of kept thinking about it, and I might be completely wrong in this, but this is kind of my concept of holiness, because one of the things is that holiness is not, certainly in Leviticus, and actually just had a session on this with my students, my MA students. Holiness is not for Leviticus some type of abstract concept that I can never achieve. It's this, this kind of high, like, who can ever be holy? It's not that type of thing. Because when you read Leviticus 19, and I said to my students, I said, okay, here's the goal, be holy, therefore, as the Lord your God is holy. And I said, just, can anybody live to that standard? No, we're all sinners. No one can live, no one can be holy. And I said, well, let's start going down the list of things that you can do, and don't wear, mixed fabric, don't plant, a field with two seeds of different kinds, whatever it is, all these things, loving your neighbor and all these kinds of things. And I said, can you do those things? And they were like, well, yeah, obviously. And I'm like, yes, then you can be holy. I'm like, then that's it. That there is something about doing these particular things in relation to our neighbor. Like, you also have sacrifice in relation to God, but there are particular things that we can do in relation to our neighbors and our families and the people around us that express the love of God through our human engagement. And so for me, holiness, as I kind of thought about it more and more, is that the holier we are, as it were, the holier we become by doing these things, the closer we draw to the heart of the Father. And I think probably I'm influenced most by John's Gospel and this idea of, of kind of this union with Christ and being drawn to the heart of the Father through the Son and through the Spirit. And so holiness, it seems to me, and if you then kind of, jump forward to the New Testament and say, okay, if Christ is holy, then what does holiness look like? Well, it looks like, caring for the poor. It looks like hanging out with the outcasts of the world and those who are vulnerable. It looks like being a servant. It looks like, casting out demons. I mean, all of these types of things that are, so that idea of separating, I think, in the Hebrew is still there. I guess in a Christian mindset, I think of it as being separate from the old, as it were, from, what Paul calls the sinful flesh and all that kind of stuff, and drawing closer to the heart of the Father. And that is so holiness is not, and I can't remember, I think I talk about it in this book, that it's not this kind of whitewashed, I want to stay away from the riffraff of the world. I'm never you'd never catch me at a bar or a nightclub in New York City after 2 a.m. in the morning because I'm a holy person. It's not that at all.
Yeah. Because I've definitely been caught at a bar after 2 a.m.
Exactly.
In New York City.
And
that's what we call a Tuesday night at my office.
That's right. Typical Wednesday at the King's College.
That's right.
Going out to do ministry. But I mean, I think that's it. And I think that's where the confusion is. And so when you mention the word holy, you're right. It often gets kind of so twisted in this language of holier than thou, or I've got to whitewash my outside so that I look holy, I act holy. When I think, if we really want a kind of an example of holiness, or the example of holiness, and we look to the life of Christ, we see that holiness fundamentally, I think, in the end, is about relationship. It's about being drawn near to the Father. But yeah, that's where I've gone with it. I'm probably wrong, but
no, I think that's helpful. And there is some abstinence language in holiness, like don't defraud the day worker. Don't put a stumbling block in front of blind people. Don't, which when I read that in class, I'm like, who would even do that? Like, why? Don't rip people off in the marketplace. I mean, it's really low hurdle stuff.
Yeah, or mocking the deaf. I mean, I got into that, and I started reading when I was writing this book, and I started reading some works by John Swinton, and I went back to Stanley Hauerwas, and kind of this idea of ministry to those with different disabilities, and I'm like, good Lord, I'm like, this is Leviticus. I'm like, this is God commands his people not to mock people or not to treat them kind of scornfully if they have a physical disability. And it's so funny because the other question that always comes up in Leviticus is the person, if the priest is maimed or has some sort of deformity, they can't go and perform temple service. And I always get the question, isn't this completely exclusionary? Isn't Leviticus just one of these books that's kind of excluding people? And I thought, well, no, yes and no. I mean, yes, there's a reason for it, but no, not in the way that you're thinking. Because when you look at some of these other passages, you think that's not at all what it's getting at.
Right. It's kind of like people filtering all of Paul through his, I don't allow a woman to speak. And we're that was his only thought on the matter.
That was the only, exactly. Global, universal, everything funnels down into that. That's it. Yeah.
No, I think that's really helpful development on Leviticus. You said something there that reminded me of something that has now slipped my mind, but maybe it'll pop back up as you keep talking. I know what it was. Speaking of Jesus, have you read Matt Thiessen's book? Okay.
Yeah. That's a great one. No, I enjoyed that.
Give me your critique, right? Because I'm actually going to interview. You're part of a ritual series. I've already interviewed Christian Eberhard, you, and then I'm going to re-interview him because I got my own questions for him, and he's agreed to do it. So Do you feel like what he's doing with Jesus and the forces of death fits in here?
Yeah, I think it's a good reading of kind of bringing in some of the Levitical laws to Jesus. Actually, we're going to look at that. We've got one more session in my class, and we do Jesus in the Leviticus in the New Testament, and so I'll use a lot of his stuff. But I think he does. I mean, I think he really takes some of the some of the passages. I think, if I remember correctly, he goes through mostly the Gospel of Mark at one point.
Yeah, which is my favorite. It should be yours as well.
Exactly, and mine. And he, I thought it was a great way, because what I had been thinking before I actually picked up his book, what I had been thinking was, and I think I talk about it in this book, is kind of the power of holiness. The power of holiness either to heal and reconcile, or the power of holiness to destroy. We have the story of Aaron's sons getting destroyed because they offer this alien fire. And so I had been thinking about the concept, and then you go to kind of John 1:14 and the tabernacling presence of Christ, and this kind of clear imagery of the power of holiness being present in Christ. And so what was interesting is I had this kind of thing in my head about the power of Christ. So whether to cast out demons or whether to heal disease and all of these things. And then it was funny, because then I picked up Matthew Thiessen's book. And then it was the forces of death thing that linked it with me, that kind of brought me back to the purity laws and things of that nature. And I thought, oh, yes, that's a great phrase to use, because it's the power of holiness to eradicate death, basically, and all these outward signs, whether it's, skin disease or bleeding or whatever it is, these things that were, that are discussed in Leviticus as things that keep you from entering into, the tabernacling presence of God, or to the temple. And I think that was one of the things I tried to explain to my students. I said, one of the main differences, between the Old and the New Testament is that the power of God that descends, this divine descent we have in Exodus, and the power of God that resides and abides in the tabernacle, the rules and regulations are as much for our protection as they are for, protecting the sanctity and the cleanness of the tabernacle. And I said, that this is not God trying to create boundaries or borders to separate himself from his people in the Old Testament. It's him creating boundaries and borders so that he can be in relationship with his people. And that kind of messes with people's thinking. And then that kind of naturally, and then I said, does that help us more naturally progress to a movement of salvation in this kind of divine descent, God dwelling, abiding with us, but now in the incarnation? I'm like, does it not seem so like polar opposite from old to new? But actually, it's a continuation of this broader story. But yeah, no. But I liked Thiessen's book. I thought it was really good.
Oh, good, because I liked it too.
Oh, good.
I was waiting for someone to just tell me why it's all wrong.
Tear it apart. Yeah.
Yeah, I was having trouble. I was just like, I like everything he's saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me if you like this analogy. Maybe I've heard this analogy from you. I don't know, but I use the electricity analogy, that electricity is a very powerful and potentially dangerous thing. But through a well-mediated electrical code, you can be in its presence, it's everywhere in this room without worrying about it tearing everything down and destroying it down or burning everything up. And that priestly activities are in some ways, electrical code that allow us to be in the presence of. Okay, have you read Christian Eberhardt's book, The Sacrifice of Jesus?
I don't think I've heard of it, but I don't think I've read it.
Okay, well, you kind of already tipped your hat a little bit to the same concept of he argues that sacrifice is not violent or bloody in Levitical thinking, and neither is it in the New Testament, that nobody associates Jesus' sacrifice to any kind of or Jesus' death to sacrifice, and that sacrifice is actually doing something else. But you do note in this book about that blood is complicated. So it's both, as Matt Thiessen would call it, a detergent, but also it's something, a sign of decay and death.
He got that from Milgram, I think.
Yeah.
Everything comes from Milgram, basically.
Everything is derivative.
In
one
way or the other.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens when, you write one of those master volumes or 3-volume set that explains everything. So kind of putting this for Christians, because it's a lot of what your book does, is it translates these ideas so that Christians can have kind of easy points of access. I think most people, Christian-wise, if they've sang nothing but the blood of Jesus, they have a sense of the one way it's complicated. But what are the different ways in which you see blood is complicating the discussion of holiness and our relationship to God?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I mean, I talk about this, and gosh, if you want to get into atonement theory, we certainly can.
That was my next question.
Yeah. It's always the one that comes up. But I think as a kind of starter into kind of the notion of blood and what blood's doing, I think definitely Milgram, he talks about blood as a detergent that washes and cleanses things. And I think certainly that's right. And, this idea that this is kind of Leviticus 17, that the life is in the blood, but God has given it for atonement. So there is this, there, especially in Leviticus, I think more so obviously than any other book in the Bible, there is this very particular, almost theological explanation that you don't usually find in the Old Testament. You don't usually find something as detailed as telling you what it actually means. Usually Leviticus just gives you the ritual and that's it. There's no explanation. So it seems like, at least certainly in Leviticus, that Leviticus is, that blood is the fundamentally the property of God. It is kind of under his and his only divine kind of purview. But, because of the state of humanity, because of our uncleanness, or because we live in the world and, we become unclean through sin, but we also become unclean through, I don't know, through, for women, if it's menstruation, or it could be, you actually.
Anything that drips out of us, basically.
Exactly.
Male or female.
To put it crassly, yes, exactly. Anything that kind of oozes and drips out of you. So you can become unclean for all sorts of reasons, but Leviticus kind of shapes blood in this idea that this life somehow is used. God gives it to us to offer on his altar. The altar is fundamentally, and I think, again, this is Milgram also, the altar is what, so blood in and of itself doesn't do anything, but when it comes in contact with the altar through sacrifice, then it kind of ignites, as it were. It becomes this kind of atoning work. Now, the interesting thing is, in Leviticus, and I think maybe this is one of the kind of points of interest for me as a Christian that really shifted my thinking, was that in Leviticus, the primary function, I would say, of blood is to cleanse the tabernacle space, right? So it's this, this idea that sin builds up and can defile the actual physical space of the tabernacle. And so that needs to be cleansed. And so, so there's also a kind of almost a secondary, if you'd put it that way, cleansing of the individual. But the sin has an effect on God's space, on his home. And so one of the things that's fascinating about that is that when you then go to the New Testament and you think, now, obviously there's multiple layers of what is happening on the cross in terms of, the Passover lamb, in terms of the blood sacrifice, Day of Atonement, all these kinds of things wrapped together in one image on the cross. But there is something about the idea that the author of Hebrews picks up, which is this, this work, Christ's sacrifice on the cross. The blood that is spilled is kind of this once for all blood. And Christ, in doing so, is allowed to enter into kind of the heavenly tabernacle, as it were, right? So we're in this earthly tabernacle, and he enters into the heavenly space. And it's as if his blood then is kind of covering in this cosmic way. And so what I was so surprised by when I went back and read is it Colossians 1:16 or something, where it says, that everything has been reconciled, everything on earth and in heaven, has been reconciled through the blood of Christ. Now that is, fundamentally, when I went back, I remember after doing all this, read that passage again, I thought, oh, that's not just a throwaway line. That is the absolute heart of what atoning sacrifice does. But now these New Testament authors have said this isn't just blood shed, the blood of animals shed for the atoning of the temple space, the tabernacle space. This is the blood of the Son of God that has now kind of atoned for the entirety of the cosmos, from heaven and earth, that all things, everything is reconciled through the blood of Christ. And so there's a fascinating study by this guy, what's his name? It's not Jonathan, Ben Sturkel. He's German chap, who's written this book on Yom Kippur in the Second Temple period. And you have these kind of Second Temple texts about this, this kind of looking forward to this eschatological, this future day of atonement when this, the priest of Aaron or Melchizedek or whoever is going to come back will have this kind of one sacrifice that will cleanse, all things. And that's a fascinating one to think about when we get, kind of closer towards a New Testament context. But I think that's the key for me. I mean, I think that's the thing that really shifted my understanding of what potentially is fundamentally happening on the cross in terms of sacrifice and the concepts of blood that you were talking about as they relate to what we read in Leviticus and the whole kind of system of kind of sacrificial offering, what blood means. It really puts the cross into a different perspective. I don't know if you found that.
Yeah, I mean, even you saying it like that, I mean, that passage in Colossians where it's all, I mean, it's punta, 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 all.
Yeah.
And like how it would be very difficult from following this line of logic that you're tracing out here to even hear that as a ritual text, as referring, as a Levitical epiphany, as it were, right? Which we know that, well, I shouldn't say we know that everything's controversial, right? But that letter to the Colossians includes seemingly Jewish festivals that might be being held above what being a member of the community of Christ is doing. So, and the connection of circumcision to baptism there for many of us is strong.
Yep.
For some others, not.
I'm on that one.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a fantastic way to kind of like make Levitical text pop again. I think that was my endorsement for the book was you make Leviticus great again.
Leviticus great again. I love it. I almost got an MLGA hat on. I was going to wear one. I should have
sent one to you. Well, even when you were saying like not mocking people with disabilities, I was like, oh yeah, okay. So all kinds of reasons Leviticus is doing all kinds of work for us. I think you kind of addressed the question I was going to ask on atonement. You actually pieced it out quite beautifully there. But I think it's time for a speed round right now.
Okay.
Are you emotionally prepared?
I'm emotionally prepared for this, I think.
All right, just a few things. This is, again, you can be quick, simple with your answers. What biblical theological work has had the greatest impact on you as a thinker? And you can just take all of my monographs out of the list.
Yeah,
let's just keep it straight here.
Besides you, gosh, I mean, there's so many. I would say I couldn't limit it to one, but I would say the work of Gerhard von Rad probably had that's had the most influence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And would that also be like a trickle down? Because I feel like I read von Rad, but I read it because other people were advising me to. And there was this kind of like, oh, this is important. Then I read it and I was like, oh, okay, I see.
Yeah. I just loved what he was doing. I just loved everything that, even if I didn't agree with it all, but what the trajectory he was taking, I thought that's what I want. That's what I like. I like the way he's thinking. Yeah. So I think he's probably the most influential. Yeah.
And probably some people are rolling their eyes at that, but that's okay. You just roll them all the way back at home.
That's right.
Or keep your eyes on the road, whatever's most appropriate. Okay, so I'm going to test your knowledge of Americana poetry because you've been living in Greater Britain for quite a while now.
I know.
You should know this one.
Okay.
I will tell you right now, Christian Eberhard did not know this one, but you should know this one. And he lives in Texas, of all places. Okay. If I told you that Jimmy cracked corn, how would you feel about that?
Oh, I don't care. Come on. That one
you got it. All
right. That one I got.
Man, if you got that one wrong, I was going to revoke your passport.
That would be pretty bad. That would have been pretty bad.
What's one of the most memorable or awkward things that's happened to you in a classroom? Or maybe even in church, because you're in church every week.
I mean, it wasn't. I mean, it was awkward, but it was kind of funny awkward because I set myself up for it. I teach on baptism with our kind of students who are going out to be priests, and so of course, you have to talk about circumcision, and what better way to talk about circumcision than having a fun image? And so I don't know where I came across it, but I had
love this story already.
Best image of it was of a banana that like the head was cut off. The top part.
Are we going to have to put a warning on this episode?
I know. It's so bad. Anyway, but the funny part of it is not so much the image. Anyway, I had the part of like the skin part of it cut off, at that one part and just sit off to the side. And so all my students were laughing. And then I said, this was the funny part, actually. I said, well, whatever you do, just do not Google images for circumcision. And what happens? Like the entire class, I just see everybody looking at their screens, typing furiously, and then the face on on the women's faces just plummeted, and I just said, "Oh no!"
You might as well tell them, "Don't think of a pink elephant." Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was
That's a good one. That's a good one. Have you picked up any Britishisms? Because you've lived in the UK for how long now?
Gosh, almost 15 years, I think.
Okay, 15 years. Yeah. So I picked up some I didn't even know any, but this is a specific category, right? So have you picked up any Britishisms that your American family or friends make fun of?
Yes. I mean, I don't say it very often, but I will say, just for the sake of not being mocked over here, I think that was probably why I say it. But I switched to talking about the wrath of God and not the wrath of God. So I don't say that one. I probably have so many others that I just don't even notice anymore. And it is funny because part of it, when I go home, people are, why do you say that? And part of it is actually just, linguistically, when you're in another country, you just say things. And if you say them in an American way, people kind of look at you strange. So you get tired of people looking at you strange. So you just start saying them the other way. Like you say something like advertisement or rather than advertisement, or you say, I'm going to use the lift, or, there goes the lorry. It's just, you just start switching for the sake of, you just get so tired of trying to explain yourself, basically.
And I found that it's not even as much terminology, all that can be that, depending on who you're dealing with, but also just the kind of the sing-songiness of British English. And haven't you, right? Like I would have never said haven't you,
that's true.
There, and it just feels very natural. And my kids still make fun of me that I did not even realize it, but I was apparently still saying lever, the levers of power, and my kids started making fun of me. So
yes.
I guess I picked it out without even knowing it.
Oh, funny.
What do you find most troubling or challenging about your Bible?
About my Bible, as opposed to your Bible?
Yeah.
What do I find most troubling about my Bible, about the Bible?
The Bible, yeah. It can be your Bible as well, if you'd like.
Yeah. I think, you know what? Actually, you know what I find troubling? I was just reading, is it Joshua 7 or 9? And I was reading the end of the story of Achan. And I just thought, the whole family stoned and then burned. And I thought, man, this is sometimes why I just don't like reading the Bible. I know there's something in there, but man, oh man, that's just one of those passages where I thought, oh gosh, how do I explain that to anybody?
Yeah, that one because I read a lot aloud in class, and I kind of read that and I just hope nobody stops me.
That's right.
Just like okay, next.
Please don't ask me a question on that one.
And then we're gonna have some boundary markers.
And there's all sorts of ones in, there's so many things in Joshua that I could go through, as I'm sure you could too. And step by step with your students, you could say, oh well, we understand this one, and but that one is just one of those ones where I'm like, I don't get it. Stoned and then burned, and then like the whole family, men, women, children. You just you don't even want to go there. Oh gosh, yeah.
Okay, well,
that's a bad one.
For a subtle transition, I have some ritual jokes.
All right, yeah, these are one here.
Okay, now here's the way we play this game. I'll give you the setup, and you have to finish the joke. So we'll see how close you come to what the actual joke is. Okay, I read a novel about a cult that sacrifices books.
Leviticus?
I'm sorry. The answer was it was a real page burner.
Okay.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
good
So that was your warm-up one.
All right. Yeah, good.
This one is a stretch. I'll just admit it. I wanted to see some geese at the pond, but I refused to perform the blood sacrifice required. As they say,
don't sacrifice geese.
No harm, no foul. Okay.
That one, no, it's a stretch.
That was a stretch. A friend of mine tried to recreate an ancient Incan cattle sacrifice, but
it was bull.
Hey, that's not bad.
Yeah,
no, but he totally butchered it.
Nice.
Okay, my dad. This is an actual dad joke that was made. My dad was complaining that he'd lost a sock after doing his laundry. I said, "It's a sacrifice to the dryer gods," and he said,
"Oh, I don't know. What did he say?"
It's a sacrifice.
Oh, that's a good one. That one I should actually. That one I should use. Yeah, that one I like. That one I like.
Okay, back to serious matters. You include the name or the animal rock badger in the subtitle of this book.
So hyrax.
So yeah, the hyrax. So what are you doing with the rock? Why the rock badger, and what does it have to do with Christians who want to engage Leviticus?
I thought you were going to say Christians who want to eat rock badgers.
Well, I mean, in Peru they would, but
what should they do? Yeah, it's just funny because I think as we've been talking, the whole world of Leviticus, and unless you really dig down deep into it, it just seems like this quirky, crazy, kooky world of just something that means nothing to anybody anymore, but maybe had some sort of meaning back then. And the rock badger is one of those lists of creatures on the do not eat list for in Leviticus 11 for the dietary laws. And I just loved it. And the editors or the folks over at Cascade or Whitfenstock found a wonderful picture for the front cover of these.
That is the cover of the book.
It is.
Little family of hyrax.
Family of hyrax. But
which they make the cutest little noises. I don't know. Have you run into them in Israel?
No, I've just seen them on like a video. I haven't run into them in Israel.
They're at En Gedi. So if you're ever in Israel and you're down at the Dead Sea, you go over to En Gedi and you'll see them there. And they get pretty close. Anyways, they're very cute.
They're very cute and cuddly. But I just thought, I thought one is just about the quirkiness of Leviticus, and the second thing is just that how can not eating a rock badger, actually make me holy? How does it have anything to do with holiness? And that I think that became kind of the center of what the book was about, which is basically like, these things are so strange that we really have to delve into this world to figure out what in the world it's talking about. And then in the end, I mean, I think, we had, all sorts of several discussions with different student groups and different people about just even something like the dietary laws and what they do theologically in forming and shaping God's holy people. And I said, even if we don't understand why, a rock badger is on the do not eat list, or why, birds of prey are on the do not eat list. And there's some great scholarly theories around all of these things. But I said, even if we don't know what to do with these things, I said, what does it teach us fundamentally about, again, and this goes back to the sacred world, about who we are in God's world, and what we can do in response to the created order around us. Because what these commands fundamentally tell us is that God has created all things, but he limits our physical desires, our desires to eat whatever it is we want to eat. In Leviticus 18 and 21, God limits our sexual desires. You can't have sex with anybody you want for the sake
or anything.
Or anything. That's true, exactly. Or any
animal.
Be
Levitical.
I know, exactly. And so, there is this sense of, I wrote this little article on our online journal for the St. Edward's Institute, but But there is this sense, and this actually comes up in Norman Wiersbe's book, The Sacred Life. There is this sense of the world we live in now has this, again, this desacralized world treats the our environment, treats the whole kind of economy of an ecology of the world as just simply material, as having no spiritual or kind of sacred significance. And so there is this sense that we as human beings are only limited by our desires, that to achieve, this driving force of, production, consumption, making things faster, technology, getting faster and more efficient. We kind of follow this, this kind of juggernaut of, modernity into this world where we think as human beings we should never be limited. And I can't remember if it was in this book or in something else, but it was, we're talking about this idea of the colonization of Mars, right? This great plan to colonize the colonized space, and how, absolutely, moronic the idea is, but yet makes complete sense in this culture of production, acceleration, advancement. Because if you can no longer advance your, or if you can no longer consume, or if you no longer can technologically innovate within this place, within this earth on which we live, then go do it somewhere else. Because then that fulfills this desire, to go above and beyond and
to colonize, because that desire has turned out so well
exactly
in the course of human affairs.
Yeah, exactly. When there's no more places to colonize, what do? You have to innovate. You have to go beyond this earth. So it's just fascinating. But this is where I think, again, this comes back to the rock badger. This is where kind of the simple beauty of Leviticus, gives the Israelites these, kind of these formulations in their life, whether it's around dietary laws, sexual laws, how to make sacrifices, how to treat your neighbor, how to plant your crops, how to take care of the alien or the stranger among you, how not to, scorn the deaf or the blind, whatever it is. It gives you a worldview where you as a human being created in God's image function and operate to bring about kind of the flourishing of creation and in your world around you, your family home, your farm, your vineyards, your neighborhood, your people around you. This is, being rooted in place and allowing that rootedness to begin to build up the community of faith and life. This is what holiness is about. And so I think we just live in such we just live in such a dynamically different world, that to go back to some of these, what seem to be, the most quirky, like make no sense type of commands. And then all of a sudden, when you step back from it and you think, maybe we as a society need a little bit more of this, and of this humility as we, situate ourselves within God's world of understanding that we don't have, it's not just our dominion to do whatever we want with, that actually, God prescribes these things to help us understand that we're part of his creation, that there are limits to what we can do that are healthy. So that's where I think Leviticus is such a great reminder of that, because you do get these kind of, and we've seen it over the past, decades, these Christian kind of doctrines or theologies that come up of dominion as, really nothing different than cultural, like, what our kind of, modern culture is telling us, that we have.
They might even be just what our culture is telling us.
Yeah, exactly.
Baptized in Christianese.
Baptized in Christianese. Like, we have dominion. We have, we can use the world in any way we want, and that's, and there's nothing, I'm free in Jesus Christ. Don't try to limit my human freedom or my human rights. Human rights. It's like, well, wait a second, wait. How does this stack up with who you are, within God's creation, and I think, a lot of times it doesn't. You're right. It's just kind of the cultural syncretism there.
And if I hear you correctly from the book, it seemed like you were also getting at something which I hadn't fully appreciated, which is there's actually some liberation to this, like freeing you up from all these things that you would do otherwise that will eventually just cause you to hate yourself, or hate yourself as a community or an individual. And so kind of like we do with, young folks as we're trying to form them and shape them, say like, you could do that, but you'll just look back and be like, why did I do that? Right.
Yeah. So, Yeah. I mean, that comes out, that came out most clearly to me in the laws around sex, basically Leviticus 18 and 21, because that was so striking how, one, how like, when you start reading those laws, you're like, was it that bad?
I like to put names from Genesis next to all the close relatives.
That's a good one. Yeah, actually.
Because they nail just about all of them.
Exactly. But
no pun intended.
But not only that, but it's this, again, it's this idea that God has instituted these commands for the preservation of the family, and that the family is, fundamentally this Beit Av, the house of the Father, is fundamentally the place where life and faith is cultivated in its, in its strongest and purest form, as it were. And, again, the authors were so aware, and I think our culture, again, is completely unaware of how, kind of crossing sexual boundaries that are not meant to be crossed, lead ultimately to the destruction of the family. And we'll see that later in in the David's son, in the rape of Absalom. Isn't it Absalom, or is it Amnon?
Amnon.
Yeah, you've got it. My brain's fried. But you see that kind of, the breaking of the Levitical law. He has sex with his sister, one of his removed. But then comes the destruction of the entire family. And from that point, it's just a downward slope.
Seems derivative also of David's dozens of wives, or we don't even know how many wives he has, right? Like, yeah. The polygamy that's run rampant there. Yeah, it's a total mess. Yeah, order for safety and liberation, right? That'll be definitely a hard message for some people to hear, that might still be a good thing. And some people might vehemently disagree with it, I'm sure. But I think you've made a lovely case. This is a journey through the world of Leviticus, the book we're talking about here, Holiness, Sacrifice, and the Rock Badger. I'm not lying when I said that he has made Leviticus great again. It is the most eloquent, accessible read I've ever seen that allows Christians to fully immerse themselves in the world of Leviticus and think through it. So I thank you for the book, Mark, and I thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Drew. It was great to be with you.
You've been listening to OnScript, delectable conversations on scripture and theology. If this episode has brought you inner peace or lit your biblical fire, please consider a small donation of just $2 or $5 per month. Information on how to donate can be found at onscript.study/donate.